Welcome, everybody. I'm Kristen Fanachero from the University of Michigan School of Information, and along with Project Director Lucy Santos Green of the University of South Carolina and Melissa P. Johnston of the University of West Georgia, I'm delighted to welcome you to the last of 3 webinars that launch our 3-year project, Online Ready. I do want to give you a heads up that we may run a few minutes past the hour today, so we're looking at an end time of probably about 9:15 Eastern. Our project director, Lucy Santos Green, conceived of Online Ready to support school librarians in developing and enacting culturally responsive pedagogy online. Thanks to the Institute of Museum and Library Services, our 3-year research project to develop that PD kicks off this fall. To develop the kind of PD school librarians need and want, we need your input. So throughout the webinar, we're going to ask you for your take on the tools, strategies, mindsets, challenges, and more from your own pandemic front lines. This session is being recorded and your feedback will be anonymized and used to guide our planning for a summer 2022 professional development cohort. I'll be back at the end of the session to tell you more about that. Also, project manager Liz Hartnett will be in touch a day or two after this live event with certificates for those attending tonight's session live, a follow-up survey, and a link to the archived session. Tonight, you'll hear about cultural competence and online K-12 librarianship from a district leadership perspective. Each perspective echoes the unique populations, concerns, and needs of their community. We'll begin with Rachel Altobelli from the Albuquerque Public Schools in New Mexico, followed by Becky Calzada of the Leander ISD in Texas. At the end, we hope we'll have a few minutes for question and answer, and I'll let them tell you more about themselves and their programs momentarily, but I'll quickly share 2 endorsements about their work, one long, one short. Rachel worked with district colleagues and the district transportation department to deliver culturally and linguistically responsive books to children while they were learning from home. And in a press article, one of the students said, "I was able to see myself through these books that I usually wouldn't see myself in. You feel like you're not alone in your situation. You feel like there are other people who are struggling the way you have. It also helps you see outside of your own hardships and see there are other sides of the story." And for Becky, if you do a search for Becky online, or you look at her social media, which is on screen, you'll see that she constantly promotes the work of others. So a big compliment for Becky is she finds talent and amplifies it. But I did watch a webinar that she did with Mr. Shu of Scholastic Book Fairs, where he repeatedly calls her contributions perfect. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Becky and Rachel.
Hello, everyone. I believe I'm up first. My name is Rachel Altobelli, and I'm from the Albuquerque Public Schools. So today we are going to talk about, I guess the next slide, please, addressing cultural competency, a tale told from 2 district perspectives. My perspective is from the Albuquerque Public School District. We're the largest district in New Mexico. We're located in Albuquerque. I guess that's kind of in the name. We have about 144 schools and 80,000 students. We are urban and suburban and rural all in one district. And I'm the director of the Library Services and Instructional Materials Department. And in terms of the work that I've been able to do, all of that is important. And also, next slide, please. So is the Yazi Martinez lawsuit. So a group of parents years ago sued the public education department in New Mexico and said that the state legislature was failing to provide a sufficient and uniform system of education to all New Mexico children, as guaranteed by the Education Clause of the New Mexico State Constitution. And the lawsuit specifically called out failures to serve low-income Native American English language learner students and students with disabilities. So when we talk about what we've done in New Mexico and Albuquerque, I feel like this is really important context. So this was years before the pandemic and remote and hybrid instruction, but it very much informed everything that we did. Also, I'm so glad to be here with all of you today. I think I forgot to say that. Can we go to the next slide, please? So other schools and districts take different approaches, and you should always take the approach that's right for you. One thing that's a little unique about my district and how libraries work is because our department is library services and also instructional materials, it really informs what we do, and it also informs our options. Because of the Yazi Martinez lawsuit, and also because it is a good and effective thing to do, New Mexico districts look for cultural and linguistic responsivity as we select textbooks. Like, it's in the reporting that we do. And because my department also works with that, it was relevant for Team Library that we couldn't, and we honestly still can't, find textbooks that meet these standards. It's just not really something that we find in them. Can we go to the next slide? Because before I start blathering on about how we determined what are culturally and linguistically responsive books, we would like to hear your thoughts on what you would consider culturally and linguistically responsive books. So if you would please share your thoughts in the Jamboard, which the link just popped into the chat, which is awesome. So if you just want to click on it and share your thoughts. Remember in the before times when like we didn't all just know how to use Jamboards and all this stuff?
So Rachel, while everybody's, posting to the Jamboard, I just want to say what a unique position it puts you in, your district, your school district in, to be able to, like you actually have to track that, and you're struggling to find materials. It's so not like the norm, and you're kind of ahead of the ball game in that, although it was because of obviously a lack of, so out of necessity in terms of having to address a lawsuit, but that kind of puts you a little ahead of the game in some ways, which is really kind of a good thing.
Absolutely. It has been so transformative because like I have to turn in a spreadsheet about the textbooks that we buy in which we talk about it. And, reporting spreadsheets are powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we've got people in the Jamboard. Oh, here we go.
Cool. And then we can sort of.
And just so for those maybe that have come in a little late, everybody's posting what would you consider to be culturally and linguistically responsive materials? And so we'd love to hear what everybody's examples are and what we've got coming in.
Yeah, so please just pop things in, and we've got people are sharing different thoughts.
I have to say it's straining my eyes a little bit. These old eyes.
And also, somebody asked us in one of the other webinars, if you happen to be watching on a phone and can't get to the Jamboard, I'm pretty sure that if you put it in the chat, one of us would be able to copy it into the Jamboard.
Thank you, whoever just did that. So you want to read some of these off, or while people are still putting in?
So it sounds like what somebody shared materials that represent students from different backgrounds and cultures. Resources that reflect authentic representation, text written in students' heritage languages. Culturally and linguistically responsive materials or materials in multiple languages and provide authentic representations of different cultures. And we could give it a little bit more time. Is anybody still typing? I want to give enough response time.
There's somebody in the chat, materials written by diverse authors.
Yes, I feel like we can add that.
Yeah, just did.
Oh, I won't add it more times.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. So all of these things, oh, still coming in. I'm seeing more people mentioning authenticity and windows and mirrors, the Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop quote that we all talk about. Ensuring inclusion, so important. Oh, this is acknowledging that the languages your students bring to your classroom are important contributions. That's so important, like an asset, like these are assets that our students bring. Wonderful, wonderful assets.
Great. These are really great.
These are great. I know maybe you guys should just do this and Becky and I'll watch. Oh.
Yeah, sharing stories and histories of traditionally underrepresented people.
Mm-hmm. Also reviewing text for bias. It's kind of like popping popcorn. Every time I think it's going to slow down, there's more.
Mm-hmm. And they're all so good.
Materials that are diverse and can be used to connect with what students are learning in class. Yes, that's such a strength of our library collections.
Hey, like it. Slow it down a little bit.
All right, well then I'll say thank you for sharing. If you have more thoughts, the Jamboard is just gonna stay there, but I guess we can move forward because we have some content, some slides to get through. So thank you for sharing. All of that is so, yeah, the inclusivity, the authenticity, looking at things as a strength. What we found, because of our unique, also living with textbooks, they're such a joy. But because of that, we were able to position library as our solution to the textbook problem. There are books that, not maybe as much as we would like, reflect our students' lives and identities, but these books are not typically textbooks, but they are the kind of books that we have or can add to our libraries. So this worked for us because it positioned our librarians completely and totally accurately as instructional leaders who have the solutions to everything. And which was also a good metaphor for libraries in the remote and hybrid instruction times. Everybody did different things to make everything work, but generally librarians did a lot of things that just made everything work. So if you don't have a lawsuit, but you have just lived through this time, there's sometimes a way to be like, you know how librarians can solve everything? We can find things that will maybe broaden the perspectives that are available. So can we go to the next slide? For my district, when we define what are culturally and linguistically responsive books, we have sort of decided that we want to keep talking about it forever. All of those things that you guys shared on the Jamboard, the authentic representation, making sure that students see themselves, the windows and mirrors. And we definitely learned as we went along. When we started doing this work about 3 years ago, one of the things that we decided is that many people decide as collaboratively as possible what culturally and linguistically responsive books are. And we commit to always evolving because we want to represent our students so fully and so completely that we keep going and we keep learning and we keep listening. So we did a lot of, for our first district-wide project, which actually I think I probably can pop in the chat. Our first district-wide project was K-8 classroom libraries, largely composed of books we already had in our school libraries. And so I just put the link if you want to see the titles and when we started that project. And if we can go to the next slide, our definitions and understanding, they're always evolving, and we don't always get everything right. Part of this work is accepting that we will always need to know more and listen more and be willing to change. It's the more I do this, the more I realize, oh, sometimes people are gonna be like, you got that wrong. You didn't represent that accurately. You don't know what you're talking about. Talk less, listen more, she says as she's talking. But you know, we're learning. So we believe that all students should find books in their libraries, classrooms, and homes that reflect and celebrate their identities, experiences, and languages. We want them to be surrounded by books and instructional materials, and we want to celebrate their intersecting identities. So race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, disability status, and all of their experiences. So not all districts include LGBTQ+ books when they are talking about culturally responsive books, but our district does, even though it's not specifically called out by the lawsuit, because we're really trying to reach, honor, and celebrate all students, and specifically all students that might be at risk or who just don't see themselves always. But we also know that we have to be willing to change, because sometimes we try and then somebody's like, I have more information and you could do this better. And so we try to just be very like, okay, we're always learning, because we're always learning. And if we can go to the next slide. Before we bought large chunks of books, we got a lot of community and stakeholder input, which I think is a wonderful thing for anyone to do, regardless of their state or district or what lawsuits may or may not be in play. It makes your work so much more comprehensive. And this is so crucial for us now. Everything you do on the front end, when you're thinking about how you can make your libraries more culturally responsive, it creates a group of future allies and people that will support you when you will inevitably get book challenges to some of your CLR books. And this will unfortunately happen. But if you get more input on the front end, you will have these people that are invested. So please share in the chat box ways that you gather input from your community and stakeholders. Because that very much varies. While we're waiting for people to type, we did things like we reached out to established community groups that our district had relationships with and asked them to review materials. We worked extensively, like I worked a lot. We worked with our language and cultural equity department. I went to a lot of meetings that parents went to, because I'm a district person, so I don't have easy access to parents. We really sought out input. We asked all the librarians, you know, ask people, what should we look for? What do we need? Anybody sharing in that? Oh,
I'm sharing. I'm just
Becky
like
shared.
So, and I could just share also just too, like, you know, obviously there's the parent survey, student surveys, just like what are the things you like, what are interests and that kind of thing too. We also have like various like campus committees, and sometimes we pull from campus committees. Sometimes we just solicit from the community in general, parents, anybody, and say who would like to participate or provide input, and then we curate it all. We don't use any names, but we say like the community was looking for this, and the parents were suggesting that, and the students were suggesting this. So I think there's just different ways to get it, but like you said, I think to be able to solicit that and provide that opportunity, it gives people voice in the process, and like, you know, what they hope for.
Yes.
Now
we've got 2 comments about asking students for recommendations, which is obviously a great idea. And it also creates, when people ask like, how did you make these decisions? Saying, this is what students are saying they want and need is incredibly powerful. And, you know, and it's also the way that everybody does collection development. Like these are, in many cases, these are not like wacky new strategies. They're established librarian strategies.
It's the box on the counter. What would you like to purchase? What do you want to read? And
yes, someone just shared, you know, speaking with students in the TBE, TPI classes, students in the GSA, teachers recommend based on their cultures and ethnicities. And that is, we try and seek out, you know, input from people that are better placed to judge whether or not representation is authentic and accurate. And we had a school that they're a K-8 school, and they had their middle school GSA pick out books for the librarian to read to the kindergartners, picture books, and that was really effective and really powerful, and the GSA kids loved it and they were so happy. And yeah, so there's all sorts of ways.
yeah, it's nice to see Lucy just shared, be sure everybody's changing their comments to everyone instead of just host and panelists, or we'll miss out on your answers. I mean, we'll see them, but we want everybody to see the great answers that everybody has. How do you solicit community and stakeholder input? Any others?
Guess it's slowing down a little bit. If you have a brilliant thought later, you should just pop it in the chat and say what question you're answering. And then we will go to the next slide, talking about professional development and preparation. And this sort of goes hand in hand so as you're preparing for what books you're going to buy, you also need to prepare yourself, the librarians in your district, you and your teachers, because it's one thing to have the books, but it's another thing to use them effectively. So professional development and preparation is totally key. And for many of us, listening is a huge part of it. And speaking for me, as you know, I'm a white lady. I do not have personal perspectives on many of the stories that we're trying to represent and celebrate. And so many times I need to listen and talk to people who are experts and do have the lived experiences. And that is something that lots of us librarians need to do. And we have to think about our beliefs and unconscious biases. And we have to, and this is hard, we have to consider our role as access providers and gatekeepers. You know, we think of ourselves as we provide access, we share, but we also decide what goes in the library and what doesn't. And we are vulnerable to self-censorship or just not realizing. Sometimes we don't know what we know. So we relied on input from our language and cultural equity department. We relied on input from our Indian Ed department, community groups, and just trying to really get in the mindset of assuming that like we don't always know best or all of the information. Even when it is an identity that like one of us shares, it's very tempting for me to think, oh, I can review LGBTQ books and for authentic representation, but I can't. I don't have experiences of all the letters. It's one of my communities, but like that's just me. I still need to seek out a lot of perspectives, and there are a lot of perspectives that I'm not an expert on, but we're librarians. We can find more information. And so now I think we have a poll, which is very exciting and fancy. And we're going to ask you, how prepared do you feel to integrate culturally responsive resources into your teaching and school library programs? So very prepared, somewhat prepared, or not prepared? Oh, now everyone's voting. Somewhat prepared is in the lead. Even more leading. And any answer is fine. We just want to know.
Well, it reminds me like what you said, we're all still learning. So it's okay. This is more not about a competition. It's more just about where you are and where you want to go.
Yes. And the nice thing about always learning is we're librarians. That is like our whole thing. If we're not learning, if learning isn't happening in the library, so as librarians, we want to be learning too. All right, and the poll is anonymous, everyone. Lucy just shared. So it looks like, can everyone see the results yet? I don't know if I'm seeing the same thing as everybody else. Are we all seeing the results? Oh, wait, you'd have to tell us in the chat. Great, awesome, thank you. So it looks like 76% of people that answered feel somewhat prepared, 21% feel very prepared, and 7% feel not prepared, which are all excellent answers. So thank you for sharing that. It's, I feel like I will also, I perpetually, I'll just share my answer. I perpetually feel somewhat prepared. I feel somewhat prepared to do this work. And also like, I would like to be more prepared, but I'm probably always gonna feel somewhat prepared. And I'm okay with that. I'm gonna be somewhat prepared and I'm gonna keep working on it anyway. But if we can go to the next slide, I have a brief practical note, especially now, as we all know, things are sort of exciting with the news and library land. If you don't have procedural directives and formal challenge processes in place, do your best to develop them and get them formally approved by your district as early in your culturally responsive library journey as possible. I know that that's not something that everybody has control over, but anything that you can do, anything that you can write down, if your school district isn't going to have a formal process, talk to your principal and see if your school can write whatever it is you're allowed to write, like a school process. See if you can have something, just something that writes down in advance that other people agree on about what you're going to do when somebody pops up and says, I have sent you a picture of a page in this book and circled the words that I am sure you will agree are completely unacceptable. It's really great to be able to say, we have a procedural directive or something that we need to follow. So that's just something that we should all think about. We go to the next slide, please. And I've talked a lot about like my circumstances, which are very unique. And so some things to think about, like what do your state and district prioritize and what do your policies and your laws look like? Whatever they are, there's a space for you to work in. And how can your culturally responsive library priorities work with your circumstances? We do the work that we do in the ways that we do it according to what surrounds us and where we're going to be able to be effective. It varies, it evolves. Family members saw a lot of instruction during remote and hybrid learning. I meant the family members of students. Family members of teachers and librarians also saw a lot of instruction. But the kids and their families saw a lot of instruction during remote and hybrid learning. And we are getting, at least in my district, we are getting more and a different kind of input as a result. And I think that is going to last. And that is going to be something that it's good. We're getting more input. But we're also getting more input in ways that we maybe haven't gotten before, and we're going to have to learn how to respond to that. So if you could please share in the chat box some ways that you addressed and used culturally responsive resources in programming and your virtual/hybrid instruction, that would be awesome. And, I know a lot of the districts, the librarians in my district, they use books, or they used ebooks, or they use different strategies about, when and how they called on students. So chime in. Or Becky and I can just share strategies that we've heard from people.
I was going to share, like, for us, it looked like, especially when we were remote, highlighting lists. Like we have Sora in our district, and so we saw a lot of usage. And so because we weren't in person, obviously, and didn't have access to books, highlighting, diverse lists, special celebrations. And so, like, for instance, we just celebrate Diwali, so we would have a list with books to celebrate that. Indigenous Heritage Month, whatever, sometimes there was, we could curate some books, maybe a couple of resources, videos, that kind of thing too. So there's like so many ways, and I just know that this audience has a ton more ideas. So I'm looking forward to hearing what they share.
Yes.
Because I know I'm not alone, and I saw a lot of unique things. And I think that's the thing, is there's so many.
Yes.
Oh, look, here we go.
Oh, that's a great one. Promoting audio sync.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly project lit titles. Yes. So I think I have taken more than half of my time, so I'm going to move forward and just quickly go through the rest of this so we can get to Becky's part.
Can we highlight one though, real quick? Like
Yes.
Shannon said, or somebody said here, she's the only school librarian, which is difficult, but she seeks out teachers and counselors. And so, I mean, those partnerships, I think that's a great opportunity to be able to share stuff like that. So that's good.
Cool. And then that is so important and so difficult to be the only librarian in the district. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. When we went into remote and hybrid instruction, we had all sorts of culturally responsive books in libraries and also classrooms, and like none of them were ebooks because we had bought all these paper books. But we had collaborative relationships across the district, and we had, and I know not everybody has this, we had board support. And we knew, and we had people that believed that the books would increase student engagement. So we were able to get support to buy a large number of culturally responsive ebooks, which meant teachers could actually share them with students, and students could check them out during remote and hybrid learning. But we were only able to do that because of the work we'd already done. So we ended up in that place because of where we'd been. But the thing about this work is, whenever you start, there will be a 3 years later in which you'll be able to build on it. So you might be 10 years into this work and way ahead of me, or you might be just starting, but wherever you are, time will pass, I'm told, and eventually, you'll be building on your work. And then we'll go to the next slide. Where are we now?
One quick thought, did we get a chance to do the chat box question?
Oh, I put it on 2 slides of
Got
the
it.
question. Apparently I just really wanted everyone to answer that question. But we did have, Andrea shared that she also curated titles related to the different monthly cultural celebrations, and also talks with students about the language and uses Google Earth to travel to that place. And the activities relate to the book culture highlighted. So like with technology tools, we can make it such a rich and interesting experience, which is very cool. So you do all these things, and then what happens after you add the resources? How do we lead school communities in this work? And how do we respond to the challenges and questions that we are all going to get? Especially as K-12 education occupies such a very, very prominent place in news and online narratives. Is anybody else looking forward to some future time in which K-12 education is not the subject of like half of the op-eds in everywhere. But people are talking about education, and we're all getting a chance to learn from our communities and grow and have really good explanations for why we do what we do. But so that's where we are. We've added things, we're doing work, we're definitely getting input, and we can go to the next slide. Even our very, very lucky situation in Albuquerque, New Mexico, we get challenges. We get questions. And so this is just my advice. Like, it can hurt to get these challenges or input, and you might get a challenge to a book, or you might get input from a community member that says, you thought you were doing a good job representing my community, but you missed the mark. That can hurt because you feel like you're trying. But if you're trying and somebody tells you that it wasn't quite good enough, then that is useful input, and you can, incorporate that and move on. It can be painful if you get a challenge to a book that represents an identity that you share. So feel all the feelings, feel them, but respond according to your plan and your procedural directives, because that is what protects you and gives you structure. Like, we get to have all the feelings, but then we're librarians and we say, this is how we respond to challenges, and this is what we believe about intellectual freedom. And we have consistent processes that we do apply to everyone and in all scenarios. And the community building you did can be very helpful at this point. And if you weren't able to do that, remember you have this national community of fellow librarians and educators, and also you can sign up for this Online Ready program and learn a lot of things. So I will stop talking now and switch over to Becky.
Thank you, Rachel. Can I just add one more thing to what you shared, though? I love what you shared as far as, like, when somebody points out something, I think it is really hard for us to ignore the emotions that we feel. And I think the emotions come from a place of, we are invested and we are passionate about the work that we do. But sometimes emotions get in the way and kind of blind us to maybe opportunities for us to learn. And I tell people, like, when you can feel like the redness kind of start to creep up to your face, or the tightness, or like maybe a little bit of anger when somebody's, perhaps in your eyes criticizing the work you do, is that an opportunity to lean in and not get defensive, but rather ask questions and say, tell me more, I don't understand, and those kinds of things, because like you said, that those are opportunities to learn. So I love hearing that from you. So anyway, so I'm Becky Calzada. I am the library coordinator in Leander ISD. You'll go to the next slide. I work in a school district in Leander, which is northwest of Austin, Texas, and I work with about 45 school librarians and media specialists. We've got some people that are almost finished with their coursework. One of the things that many people don't know about me is that I am a first generation US citizen. My mother immigrated to this country from Bolivia, South America, and my dad was actually born in Mexico, although his mom was a US citizen. And so I am a white presenting Hispanic / Latina. I go back with the words because I grew up saying Hispanic, but you hear like it's Latina now. So anyway, but I've worked in the school district in Leander for about 23 years. And for the last 9 years as the library coordinator. So next slide, I want to tell you a little bit about our school district. And so our school district is very large. It's northwest of Austin, Texas, and it covers 200 square miles. It's very spread out. We've got an enrollment right now about 40-ish, 40,000 goes back. I think we're now 42. The growth is, kind of coming back, ramping back up because we went down during the pandemic. We employ about 3,000 teachers, over 3,000 teachers, have, like I said, 45 schools, and serve 55 different languages in our school district. We are known for our ESL program. And you'll see there the demographic data in our state. There's a comparison, district data versus state data. And when I arrived here several years ago, I've just seen, the change in terms of the growth and the demographics. And so while we're looking at that, while I'm talking about this, I'd like to take us to a Jamboard activity, and I'm curious to know how you gather demographic data. And so Kristen's put that information in the chat, and while we're waiting on people to answer, I'll share a little bit more about our specific demographic data. Our district, I mean, like I said, I've been there 23 years, and when I came here with my two daughters, the second high school was just being opened. We now have 6 high schools, and we've mushroomed with, elementaries and middle schools, and it was pretty much predominantly white. And I never really quite realized it until, I guess, years later when I was standing in my daughter's high school, waiting for her and watching the bell ring. And I just noticed, coming from South Texas, the Corpus area, and really a more predominantly Hispanic, that just a lot of white people. But one of the things that we've noticed with all of the growth across our state is that, our state is changing. And so looking at that demographic data has been really key, because as you shared earlier, Rachel, we serve a diverse population. And so as a district, it is important for us to make sure that there's representation, not even just in the materials, but in the teachers that teach our children, that there's representation in the librarians. And so understanding that demographic data, what it is, what the current reality is, and then looking at what does our demographic look like in terms of the representation of teachers. So I think it's really key to look at that, to get an understanding, and really it's a data point as you proceed in your collection development or in your hiring practices, whatever it is you're doing. That gathering that data is I think important, and it confirms versus then you're guessing. I tell people all the time, do we want to know, or do we want to hope we know? I want to know. And so every year annually we get demographic data, but in the case that I shared here, we actually had comparison to the state. And of course we look at that when we compare to others. And so let's see what we've got here. So some people look at registration papers. The state of Illinois requires schools to report demographic data, so that's good. It's self-reported, and so it's something you all can look at. Michigan has a data site where demographic and other data is available. That's great. Somebody else gets data from NCES, the state, BOE, and governor's office, and the district. I don't know what BOE stands for. Do you? Board of Education? Is that maybe? Probably. Census data, demographic, now databases. Yeah. So there's definitely different places that you could get data from. And sometimes maybe it's more about like figuring out where do you go to ask for that information to help guide what you're doing. So perfect. Thank you, Sherry. So any more? Shall we move back to the slides? So to kind of highlight a little bit more about us, we've got, I wanted to share our mission, and I was going back and forth whether to share this or not, but I wanted to put this out here, and I got some good feedback from the group. And so, as you read that there, I think one of the things that it helped me to realize is that our mission speaks to, the inclusiveness and wanting to, foster literacy, but then also just providing that opportunity for our students to learn about their world, to engage their curiosity in the resources, whether they're the physical resources or the digital resources, give them that opportunity to learn about their world. And so a lot of this mission, propels us in the work that we do. Next slide. So a little bit more about our journey, our equity journey. For me and for our group, it really kind of started with me. Back in 2018 and 2019, our district really kind of started looking at equity as a district. And so they started it at the district level. And there was an invitation. It really wasn't everybody's going. It was who would like to be a part of this district equity team. And it was just an opportunity to start the conversation, provide some opportunities for those that were truly interested and invested to learn more and to challenge beliefs and learn about our system, and come together as a group to kind of think about some possible solutions and ways that we we could work towards this goal. Next slide. And so, it looked like us, coming together early, 7:30 in the morning. They would give us a little bit of breakfast, and we would read articles, we would watch a video, we would, look at some research, learn about some terms. And there was not only just reading and learning, but we were coming together to have discussions and really kind of making this connections, like what could we do with this information? How do we see it working in the work that we do, which I think is really important. And so kind of helping us to get us to personalize it in a way and help us to think about, like in my case, what is this learning going to look like if I were to share this with our librarians in our district. So next slide. And so like I shared earlier, we participated in the Google Classroom. I want to say there was probably about maybe 40 of us that just were, passionate. We did some book studies like Courageous Conversations About Race. We would watch, TED Talks and like Chimamanda Adichie and read different things. And again, just because we're trying to have some sort of foundation and understanding of what equity and cultural responsiveness look like in our district. And so this provided somewhat of an impetus to at least to get us to learn, but it was more like, well, what was going to happen next? Next slide. And so throughout all these readings, at the end of the year, we were each asked a question about as far as our takeaways, and we were instructed to sort of come up with what our why was and what were we gonna do with all this. And so for those of you, everybody knows about Simon Sinek and what's the why. And so for me, it's just being really reflective, and we had some accountability partners. So I partnered with our ELA department, elementary and secondary coordinators, and just said, here's kind of what I think my why is. And so we would reach out to each other and just say, what am I missing? What do you think? And you'll see at the bottom what I shared. And of course, it was more just for me to kind of think strategically, like, what could this look like? What could we do as a group? Which led us to the next slide. So in March of 2012, it was an opportunity for us to come together as a group, and me basically taking some of that learning that I had with our greater group, but now with the librarians, and sharing a video with them and asking, why is this important? What are your takeaways from watching The Danger of a Single Story? Is that potentially a problem here where we are at? Helping them to see what the connections are, and asking them what they are. So at that same launch, we introduced a book study, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with this Heinemann book, No More Culturally Irrelevant Teaching. It's a super skinny book. It's kind of a way to just dip your toe in, but it's a really great opportunity to get some data about, cultural responsiveness, what it looks like in an elementary classroom, a secondary classroom, because there were lessons examples of, the missed opportunities, also reiterating the importance of appreciating all identities and, recognizing those shared connections. And so then the following October, in that fall, again, came together as a large group, because one of the things that people don't know is we don't come together often as a big group. It's usually beginning of the year, end of the year, and maybe a meeting in between each semester. So there was an October meeting where everybody came together, and I posed these essential questions, and using those questions gave them an opportunity to just really do a dive on their own, looking at things like all the different infographics that were out there about publishing, and just studying the different ones and what they shared, what did they mean, what were the implications, having an opportunity to read some professional articles at their choice about, collection development and what that could be and how that applied into their practice. Really taking a look at librarianship in that position of power. Many people, you mentioned earlier, Rachel, that you talked about, that opportunity that we have, we don't realize it, but, we are in a position of power, and what we do with that power is extremely critical to consider. We have funding power, we decide what to purchase, so how do we leverage that opportunity in the use of the funds? We control what's getting purchased, so what are we letting in? And then, of course, the access piece. Do we allow it to come in? So recognizing how that power is leveraged is so important. And so really being thoughtful about, ensuring that there's diverse materials coming in, that we're looking at materials that maybe are dated and are stereotypical, and really, working to get those kinds of things out and having conversations about, is this appropriate or not, and that kind of thing too. So now, today, in the present world. And then, of course, we know that in 2020, the pandemic hit. And so just like anybody else, things kind of stopped. And I say stopped in that we were kind of in the zone. You can go to the next slide about survival. And it was hard, and trying to have control about, what we could do and what we could get and share. And then, of course, in June 2020, actually, maybe it was late, I forget, George Floyd was killed. And I'll never forget that day, because it was such an emotional day. I mean, just the whole, I think everybody was just in shock with what happened. And we just happened to have an end of year librarians meeting. And I had been pressing on our district and saying, we should be saying something, we should be saying something. We are talking about our equity journey, because at the time it was kind of, there were conversations at the board. I said, but we are silent, and kind of telling, sharing with people that our silence is action. And so they came out with a statement. And then, of course, the next day we met as a group, and I had planned to do all these different things, but I could tell just from the group themselves how it was important to just acknowledge the pain that we were all feeling for our world, and what were we going to do with that? How could we harness that? And so it was really a pivotal moment. And then we ended up watching Clint Smith's TED Talk on the danger of silence, which I think was very powerful. And so I really think that kind of set kind of a fire under us to really to help determine what we were going to do as a group. And of course, we went through summer, started the school year, looked at reports and things, and noticed, like, because we didn't have a lot of physical access to books, that, Sora was really taking off. So really working on our digital collection to make sure there was a lot of diverse materials in there. And in the fall, we started the Project Ready modules. And so I'd heard about Project Ready. And so kind of had gone through them myself and thought, well, I want us to start this. And so we started it that fall, and went slow, because I didn't want people to feel a lot of pressure, because I think, at the time we thought, well, there's a lot going on with, remote instruction and hybrid and that kind of thing too. So went slow. So every time we met virtually, I'd say, okay, we're going to do another part. We're going to do another part. Come February of last year was when the storm hit. In fact, we were supposed to do some more Project Ready work. And of course, then the storm hit, and there was no power. So nothing happened. And so we basically didn't have a PD day, because we were shut down for, ended up being a week. But kind of fast forward to the summer of this past year is when the governor signed House Bill 8979, which is the law, which was that critical race theory. And that's where things have gotten a little stickier for us, I think. And I say that in a sense is that there's so many rules about, you can't do this and you can't do this. So for example, Project Ready, I'm not allowed to force anybody to take this if they don't want to. And I mean, I would never presume to force anybody, but I think too, again, it's kind of just that, nobody should made to feel uncomfortable. And so anyway, this has definitely been a challenge that we've been kind of navigating as a group. But I think even just as a district, and I don't think we're alone. I think it kind of happens all over, or is happening all over. So next slide. So kind of try and find ways to continue that learning. This past fall, because of the different challenges that we've had in our district, and everybody should know. I mean, if our name sounds familiar, it's because we've been in the news a lot with book challenges and stuff. But a lot of the challenges came with our language arts adoption with books in the classroom. And so we had a lot of people reach out, and so questioning what our policy looked like. And I felt like we had a really good policy, but what they wanted to do was separate it. So they the board passed passed two different policies. The reconsideration policy was updated so they could separate library materials from classroom materials. And then they also passed a policy on equity, diversity, and inclusion, which includes definitions for those three particular words, and then also to work on the hiring of an EDI chief of staff. So we're working on that, hasn't happened yet. But we now have had more, challenges with now the book Lawn Boy. And one of the things that we're working on right now, in fact, I was telling somebody earlier, I got a phone call from somebody, they were asking me about maybe presenting to our school board about book selection, because our board is curious, and sometimes it is, good to talk directly to the people that do the work. But we are actually working on, as a group, those what are those talking points that we want to give to parents and we want to post, because we're not trying to hide anything. We're very transparent. I think what it is people are jumping straight to the board instead of coming to have a conversation. So how can we facilitate that transparency and build understanding? So, but as of late, our latest project is a critical cataloging project. And I don't know if you do a lot with that, Rachel, or you've heard much about it, but I attended a session in the summer and learned about the movie Change the Subject. I don't know if any of you are familiar about it, but it's from Dartmouth College. And they had a movie about some specific subject heading terms in our cataloging. And I feel like that's an opportunity for us. And so we have met with one of our vendors to see about doing some cataloging updates, because many people might not realize that there's some terms that exist that are not, that don't honor people. So an example, illegal aliens is one term. And we want to change that to undocumented immigrant, because we feel that honors people. There are many other terms in our catalogs right now, like slavery, changing slavery to enslavement. There's a lot of terminology around LGBTQ that needs to be updated that honor them, and so that's really our next big project right now. And so we are working on lists right now. We by no means have all the answers, but we know that there's a lot of people doing this work, and I feel like that's another way that we can honor everyone, and help to facilitate the cultural competence of all. And I think many people think like, well, can you do that because it's Library of Congress and stuff, and many people don't know that there's the Library of Congress you have to go through rules, and you got to submit a request to make a change, and it's a little arduous. And so but it does happen. And an example of that would be the Tulsa race riot is one subject heading that actually just got changed this past spring. It's now called it should be named the Tulsa Race Massacre. And I feel like and that's good, that's positive, but I mean it took a couple of years. But it's those kinds of things that I think, where we can make a difference and help to educate others about, the opportunities that we have. So yeah, so that's basically our journey. I think, is that the last slide? I want to say, yeah. So look at us.
We've gotten
right at 8 o'clock.
Look at that. We will take a couple of minutes for questions. We know that this issue is a sensitive subject in some districts. So if you have a question that you don't want to have your name associated with, the chat is not recorded in the when we archive this on YouTube, but I'm happy to relay questions from direct message if you prefer it that way.
And while everybody is queuing up their questions, Becky, we're starting to do a little bit of work with the subject headings as well. I totally agree. It's incredibly important, and I don't think we need to wait for the Library of Congress. I think we can be nimble and move ahead.
I agree. And I think, like I shared earlier, I mean, I think it's reaching out to vendors, and, we have a cataloging company we work with, and they said, we've actually had that question a couple of times, so we're interested, let's chat. And so I think it's, again, I love that the fact that they're listening and want to support. So I'm happy to share what I know. I'm like you, by no all means don't know everything, but I am like that. I'm an active seeker and learner. I want to hear more. So maybe that's something that we can, all compile together. So
Yeah. We've also started to notice that in the MARC records we get, the Newbery and Caldecott winners, that's included. But the Portable Prey and the Coretta Scott King and the Stonewall Awards are not always listed. And increasingly we have librarians that want to have little book clubs for the kids to read through all the award winners, and they're not as easy to find. So we've been talking with vendors like, well,
it's good to know.
Why are you
making
right?
a note of that? Making a note. That's great.
Because if we all ask the vendors these questions, eventually it'll make sense for them to change.
Agreed.
And
Well,
also
not like
think
there's-
about
ahead.
like I work for a book publisher, and they're dying to know, especially series nonfiction, they are dying to know what you want and need in your collection. And because they tend to be pretty small operations, it's not that hard to get in touch with your favorite publisher and tell them what you need. It saves them from meetings where they try to guess what you need.
Yeah, agreed. I ask all the time. Nothing to lose, all to gain.
That's right. And they want to sell books. So
That's right.
all right. Well, it looks to me like we don't have any questions right now. So what I'll do is do the closing commentary. And then if there are any questions that have bubbled up, we can always circle back. So we want to thank you for being here today and thank Rachel and Becky. What I really appreciate is this window into the ways in which they, as district leaders, are navigating between public sentiment, district leadership, the materials that students are asking for and needing in their collection. And I know that in my state, we don't have many people left who play this role. And so some of you are listening to this tonight thinking, gosh, I got to fight this on my own. And it's really been helpful to have your perspective. We want to, before we let people go for the night, we want to make sure that you know that we're recruiting. So we mentioned at the beginning of this session that the kinds of data that you've contributed help us know how to design a 6-week summer professional development module around culturally competent K-12 online pedagogy. And it will be fully online. It's through the University of South Carolina as the lead research agent. And we're looking for 15 K-12 librarians who are eager to deepen their culturally responsive online school library instruction. And that's representing a wide swath of diverse measures, including geography, socioeconomic status, language, ability, and more. And the idea is that you will be our first batch of pilot learners, and then you'll be supported in the fall by members of the project team as you implement some of what you have learned. That will help us get the kind of feedback we need before we take the project to a larger scale. Participants will receive continuing education credits and a stipend from the University of South Carolina of $800. So hopefully that will help those of you who need to work in the summer because your school year salary isn't really great. We hope that that will help subsidize the cost of participating. So I will put the link in the chat, and the deadline will be January 1st. And for those of you who joined us late, I'll just remind you that within about 2 days, you'll hear from Liz Hartnett from the University of South Carolina, and she will be getting you the certificate if you've attended live, a link to the archived recording, and also a follow-up survey. So thanks again for all of you for being here. Thanks to our presenters, and thanks to you for all of the information you've shared that will impact the design of next year's work. That's all for tonight. Good night.